Aunt Melody only gives gift cards because she doesn't really care about us, my 8-year-old nephew Camden announced at Christmas dinner, holding up the $100 Target gift card I'd carefully chosen for him. Dad says only losers give gift cards because they're too lazy to think of real presents. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The entire dining room went silent. 23 family members, all staring at me while Camden stood there in his little reindeer sweater, completely oblivious to the bomb he'd just dropped. My brother-in-law Marcus didn't even flinch. He just kept cutting his ham like his son hadn't just called me a loser in front of the entire Blackwood family Christmas gathering. I felt my face burn as my sister Veronica quickly snatched the gift card from Camden's hands. "Camden, sweetie, why don't you go play with your cousins?" she whispered, but the damage was done. My nephew had just publicly humiliated me with words that clearly came straight from his father's mouth, and no one, not one single person at that table, said a word in my defense. But what happened next? What I did in response to being called a loser by an 8-year-old who was obviously parroting his parents? Well, let's just say my family learned very quickly that this particular loser had been keeping very detailed records of exactly who the real losers were. By New Year's Eve, Marcus was sleeping in his car, Veronica was borrowing money from strangers online, and Camden was asking his grandmother why Daddy was crying so much. My phone exploded with 47 missed calls in one day, death threats from Marcus, sobbing voicemails from my mother, and a text from Veronica that simply said, "Please stop destroying our lives." But I was just getting started. See, what my family didn't know, what they never bothered to learn, was that their loser aunt who gave lazy gift cards was actually Melody Chen, senior financial analyst at Pinnacle Wealth Management in downtown Riverside Heights. The same Melody Chen who had been quietly tracking every single dollar she'd loaned, gifted, or contributed to family members over the past 6 years. The same Melody Chen who had digital receipts, bank records, and legal documentation for every birthday bailout, every emergency loan, and every temporary rent payment that somehow never got paid back. You see, while Camden was learning to call me a loser from his daddy Marcus had been calling me his guardian angel every time his construction company went under. Which was roughly every 18 months. And Veronica? Sweet Veronica had been calling me the best sister ever every time she needed someone to co-sign her loans, cover her credit card payments, or fund her latest MLM scheme. For 6 years, I'd been the family ATM. The emergency contact. The backup plan. The reliable one who always said yes when everyone else said no. I'd paid for Camden's daycare when Marcus lost his 3rd job. I'd covered Veronica's car payments for 8 months straight when she decided to become a lifestyle influencer. I'd even paid for their wedding photographer when their check bounced 3 days before the ceremony. But apparently, giving a gift card made me a loser. What my family didn't realize was that their lazy aunt had actually spent 3 hours at Target the night before, carefully selecting that specific gift card amount because I knew Camden wanted the new Lego architecture set that cost exactly $89.99. I'd chosen Target specifically because they had the best selection of toys in Millbrook Valley, and I'd included the extra $10 so he could buy something small for himself too. I'd even written a personal note on the card explaining why I thought he'd love building the Statue of Liberty set. But Marcus had taught his son that gift cards meant I didn't care. That I was too lazy to think of real presents. Meanwhile, Marcus hadn't bought his own son a Christmas gift in 2 years because I'd been funding their entire holiday season. The irony was absolutely beautiful. And by the time I was done with them, they'd understand exactly how beautiful it was. Because here's what Camden didn't announce at Christmas dinner, that his college fund, the one with $23,000 in it, was actually funded entirely by his loser aunt. The same aunt who'd been making $500 monthly contributions for 4 years straight while his parents bought jet skis and took Vegas vacations. Here's what Veronica didn't mention while she sat there silent, that the house they were living in, the beautiful 4-bedroom colonial and Maplewood estates that all the relatives always complimented, was only possible because I'd provided the $40,000 down payment as a family investment that they'd somehow forgotten to pay back. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. And here's what Marcus definitely didn't want anyone to know, that his construction business, Blackwood Brothers Building, was currently operating with my name on every major contract as the financial guarantor. Because his credit was so destroyed from his previous business failures that no supplier would work with him without a cosigner. But after Camden's little speech about losers and gift cards, well, they were about to find out what it felt like when their loser aunt decided to stop being so generous with her lazy money. By January 15th, Marcus would be explaining to his suppliers why his financial guarantor had suddenly withdrawn support. Veronica would be learning what a balloon payment was when the house loan came due. And little Camden would be discovering that college funds can disappear just as quickly as they appear when the person funding them decides she's tired of being called a loser. 23 family members watched that 8-year-old insult me at Christmas dinner. Not one of them said a word. But they'd all have plenty to say once they realized their loser was actually their lifeline. And I was about to cut the cord. The silence that followed Camden's announcement stretched on for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 10 seconds. 10 seconds where I sat there, fork halfway to my mouth, staring at my 8-year-old nephew who had just called me a loser in front of our entire extended family. I looked around the table, waiting for someone, anyone, to correct him. To tell him that wasn't a nice thing to say. To apologize on his behalf. Something. Anything. My mother, Patricia, was suddenly very interested in her mashed potatoes. My father, Robert, took a long sip of his wine and avoided eye contact entirely. Aunt Lucinda whispered something to Uncle George, who just shrugged. Cousin Derek actually smirked and nudged his wife Sarah like this was some kind of entertainment. But it was Marcus's reaction that really drove the knife home. My brother-in-law looked up from his plate, glanced at me with the most casual expression imaginable, and said, "Well, he's not wrong." Then he actually chuckled. "I mean, come on, Melody. Gift cards? Really? It's Christmas, not a trip to the gas station." The table erupted in uncomfortable laughter. Not the kind that says, "This is awkward and we need to diffuse the tension," but the kind that says, "Finally someone said what we were all thinking." Veronica, my own sister, jumped in to defend her husband. "Marcus doesn't mean it like that," she said, but she was smiling. "It's just, gift cards are kind of impersonal. Especially for kids. Camden gets so excited about opening actual presents." "Yeah," Camden piped up, clearly encouraged by his parents' support. "Real presents come in boxes and wrapping paper. Gift cards are just plastic rectangles. That's what Dad says." More laughter around the table. Cousin Jessica nodded knowingly. "Kids do love the unwrapping experience," she said, like she was sharing some profound parenting wisdom. "It's about the thought behind the gift, The thought behind the gift." I set my fork down carefully, trying to process what was happening. "Camden," I said quietly, "do you remember what I wrote in the card that came with your gift?" He shrugged. "I didn't read it. Mom said gift cards don't need cards." I looked at Veronica, who had the decency to look slightly embarrassed. "I just meant, it's not like it's a birthday or anything. Christmas is more about the excitement of opening things." "Right," Marcus added, gaining confidence. "Kids want toys, not homework assignments about what to buy." Uncle George cleared his throat. "Well, gift cards are practical," he offered weakly. "Practical," Marcus repeated, like the word tasted bitter. "Exactly. Practical. Not thoughtful. Not personal. Just practical." He gestured around the table at all the wrapped boxes, the carefully chosen outfits, the handmade crafts from the younger cousins. "Look at what everyone else brought. Real gifts. Things that show they actually thought about who they were buying for." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. "Marcus," I said carefully, "are you saying I didn't think about Camden when I chose his gift?" "I'm saying a gift card is what you give your mailman," he replied with a laugh. "It's what you give when you can't be bothered to actually shop for someone. Or when you don't really know the person," Cousin Derek added helpfully. "Like distant relatives or coworkers." The implication hung in the air like smoke. I was being categorized as a distant relative. A coworker. Someone who didn't really know or care about Camden. That's not fair, I started to say, but Marcus cut me off. Look, Mel, I'm not trying to hurt your feelings. But Camden's 8. He wants Transformers and video games and comic books. He doesn't want a plastic card that makes him do math to figure out what he can afford. Marcus reached over and ruffled Camden's hair. Right, buddy? You want real presents from people who know what you like. Camden nodded enthusiastically. Yeah. Like Dad got me the new PlayStation game, and Mom got me the Spider-Man costume, and Grandma got me the remote control car. I glanced around the table at all these thoughtful gifts. The PlayStation game that was rated M for mature, completely inappropriate for an 8-year-old. The Spider-Man costume that was clearly sized for a 5-year-old and would never fit him. The remote control car that I happened to know was missing half its parts because I'd seen Uncle George hastily rewrapping it from last year's clearance pile. But these were real gifts. Thoughtful gifts. Unlike my lazy, loser gift card. Besides, Veronica added, warming to the theme, you make good money, Mel. You could afford to get him something really nice. Something special. Not just this. She held up the gift card like it was contaminated. The table murmured in agreement. Yes, Melody makes good money. Yes, she could have done better. Yes, this was disappointing. That's when it hit me. This wasn't really about the gift card at all. This was about them establishing their narrative. The narrative where I was the selfish sister who had money but didn't want to spend it properly. The careless aunt who couldn't be bothered to really care about her nephew. The loser who gave loser gifts because she was too lazy or too cheap or too disconnected to do better. It was a story that absolved them of everything. Every loan I'd given that was never repaid. Every emergency I'd handled. Every time I'd stepped in to save the day. None of that mattered because I was just the practical, impersonal, distant relative who gave gift cards at Christmas. I looked at Marcus, still chuckling at his own cleverness. At Veronica, nodding along like she'd discovered some universal truth. At Camden, innocently parroting words that would change everything. And I smiled. You know what? I said, standing up from the table. You're absolutely right. The room went quiet again. A gift card is exactly what you give when you don't really know someone, I continued, my voice steady and calm. When you're not really close to them. When you're just distant relatives. I picked up my purse and coat. Thanks for clarifying that relationship for me. It's going to make the new year so much simpler. The drive home from Christmas dinner was quiet, but my mind was racing. As I pulled into my driveway at 847 Willowbrook Lane, I kept replaying Marcus's words, gift cards are what you give your mailman. The casual cruelty of it. The way everyone had laughed along like it was the most natural thing in the world to humiliate me. But what really stung wasn't the insult itself, it was how easily they'd rewritten history. How conveniently they'd forgotten that I wasn't just Camden's aunt. I was the aunt who had been there for every single milestone, every crisis, every moment when his actual parents had failed him. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat down at my kitchen table, surrounded by the carefully organized filing system I'd maintained for years. Not because I'm obsessive, but because I work in finance and I understand the importance of documentation. Every receipt, every bank transfer, every loan agreement was filed away in labeled folders. The Marcus and Veronica folder was particularly thick. Let me paint you a picture of how I became the distant relative who gives lazy gifts. It started 8 years ago, when Veronica called me sobbing at 2 a.m. She was pregnant, unmarried, and terrified. Marcus had just lost his job at Henderson Construction and they were facing eviction from their tiny apartment on Elm Street. Mel, I don't know what to do, she cried. We have nowhere to go. I didn't hesitate. I drove across town in my pajamas and moved them into my spare bedroom that same night. They stayed for 7 months. 7 months where I paid for groceries, utilities, gas money, and doctor visits. 7 months where Marcus promised he was actively looking for work, while spending most days playing video games in my living room. When Camden was born, I was the one who drove Veronica to the hospital because Marcus was too nervous to handle the stress. I was the one who stayed up all night helping with feeding so Veronica could rest. I was the one who bought the crib, the car seat, the stroller, and enough baby clothes to outfit triplets. And when they finally moved out, it was into a house I helped them find, with a security deposit I provided, and furniture I bought because babies need stable homes. Did they see that as distant? Impersonal? Lazy? 2 years later, Marcus started Blackwood Brothers Building with grand dreams of becoming Millbrook Valley's premier construction company. The only problem was he had no capital, terrible credit, and a business plan written on napkins. But he had something better, a sister-in-law who believed in family and worked at a wealth management firm. I co-signed his business loan for $75,000. I helped him set up proper accounting systems. I even connected him with clients through my professional network. When his first major project went over budget and the client threatened to sue, I covered the $12,000 shortfall to protect his reputation. "You're saving my whole business," Marcus told me then. "I'll never forget this, Mel." Never. Apparently, never lasted about 6 years. The pattern became predictable after that. Every 18 months, like clockwork, Marcus would hit a rough patch. A client would stiff him on payment. A project would go sideways. Equipment would break down. And somehow, the solution was always the same: Aunt Melody to the rescue. I paid for new power tools when his were stolen from a job site. I covered payroll when a major client delayed payment for 3 months. I even bought him a used pickup truck when his old one died, because contractors need reliable transportation. Meanwhile, Veronica developed her own relationship with my wallet. First, it was Mary Kay Cosmetics. She was going to build an empire selling makeup to suburban moms. I funded her starter kit, her inventory, her promotional materials. She sold exactly 7 lipsticks, all to relatives who bought them out of pity. Then it was essential oils. Same story, same outcome, same request for funding. Then jewelry. Then fitness supplements. Then some cryptocurrency scheme that she swore was different from all the others. Each time, she'd call with the same breathless excitement. "Mel, this is it. This is my chance to contribute to the family finances." And each time, I'd write another check because I wanted to believe that maybe this time would be different. But the most expensive pattern was the emergencies. Camden's daycare bills when Marcus's company had a slow month. Car repairs when Veronica's transmission died. Medical bills when Camden broke his arm and they'd let their insurance lapse. Emergency dental work. Emergency roof repair. Emergency everything. I kept telling myself this was what family did. We helped each other through tough times. We invested in each other's success. We made sacrifices for the people we loved. Except somewhere along the way, I noticed I was the only one making sacrifices. When I had pneumonia 3 years ago and missed 2 weeks of work, did anyone check on me? Send soup? Offer to help? Veronica texted once, "Hope you feel better soon. By the way, can you Venmo me $300 for Camden's school supplies? Thanks." When I got promoted to senior analyst and wanted to celebrate, did anyone suggest dinner? Drinks? Even a congratulatory phone call? Marcus's response was, "Cool. Now you can afford to help us refinance the house." And the gifts? Oh, the gifts were always a one-way street. For Camden's birthdays, I'd spend weeks researching the perfect present. Age-appropriate educational toys that would challenge him. Books that matched his reading level. Art supplies when he showed interest in drawing. I'd wrap them carefully, include thoughtful cards explaining why I chose each item. What did I get for my birthday? Usually nothing. Sometimes a generic card if I was lucky. One year, Veronica gave me a half-used bottle of perfume that I'd bought her the Christmas before. But somehow, in their minds, I was the one who didn't put thought into my gifts. As I sat there with my wine, surrounded by evidence of 6 years of financial support, I started adding numbers. Not because I wanted to keep score, but because I needed to understand the scope of what I'd been funding. Loans that were never repaid, $47,000, emergency assistance, $23,000 business support, $31,000 holiday and birthday gifts for Camden, $8,000 various MLM investments, $15,000 co-signed debt still on my credit report, $89,000. $113,000. Plus interest. Plus the opportunity cost of what that money could have earned if I'd invested it properly. But the real cost wasn't financial. It was emotional. It was the slow erosion of my self-worth as I watched them take my generosity for granted. It was the way they'd trained me to believe that my value to the family was directly proportional to my willingness to open my wallet. And tonight, at Christmas dinner, they'd made it crystal clear, no matter how much I gave, how much I sacrificed, how much I showed up for them, I would always be the outsider. The distant relative. The loser who gives lazy gifts. Marcus had drawn the line in the sand. He'd established the rules of engagement. Fine. I could play by those rules. But first, I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with. Time to take a much closer look at where all my money had actually gone. I opened my laptop and pulled up the spreadsheet I'd been maintaining for years. What started as simple financial tracking had evolved into something much more comprehensive, a detailed record of every request, every emergency, and every promise that was never kept. The patterns were impossible to ignore once I laid them out chronologically. March 2019, Marcus called in a panic. A client had refused to pay for a bathroom renovation, claiming the work was substandard. He needed $8,000 immediately or his suppliers would put him on credit hold. Just a loan, Mel. 2 weeks, tops. I've got another job starting Monday that'll cover it. I transferred the money that same day. 6 months later when I brought it up, he said, I thought that was a Christmas gift. May 2019, Veronica's car needed a new engine. $4,200. We can't afford a car payment right now with Camden starting preschool. I paid the mechanic directly. When I suggested they could make monthly payments to me instead of a bank, she laughed. You don't charge family interest, do you? August 2019, Camden needed school clothes and supplies. Veronica sent me a shopping list that included designer sneakers and a tablet, for educational purposes, $890. You're so good at picking out quality stuff, and you know we want the best for Camden. October 2019, Marcus's truck broke down right before a big project. He needed to rent equipment and couldn't do it without reliable transportation. $15,000 for a gently used pickup truck. This is an investment in the business, Mel. I'll make the truck payments through the company. The company never made a single payment. December 2019, Christmas shopping for Camden, plus contributions to the family gift fund for my parents, plus covering Veronica's share of the holiday dinner costs because her essential oils business was, in a growth phase, $2,100. And that was just 1 year. 1 year of being the family ATM. But the more I dug into the records, the more I realized this wasn't just about money. It was about a carefully orchestrated system of exploitation that went far beyond financial contributions. Take babysitting, for example. I'd become Camden's default childcare provider whenever Marcus and Veronica wanted to go out. Date nights, weekend trips, business events, friends' parties. If they needed a sitter, they called me. Not because I was particularly good with kids, but because I was free. Camden loves spending time with his Aunt Melody, Veronica would say. It's such good bonding time for you too. Bonding time. That's what she called it when I spent my Friday nights helping Camden with homework while they went bar hopping in downtown Millbrook Valley. That's what she called it when I gave up my Saturday to take him to soccer practice because they wanted to sleep in. That's what she called it when I canceled my own vacation plans to watch him for a week while they took a much-needed couples retreat to Napa Valley. And the emotional labor. God, the emotional labor. I was the one Camden called when he had nightmares and his parents were too tired to deal with it. I was the one who attended his school plays when Marcus had to work late and Veronica had a migraine. I was the one who helped him with science fair projects, taught him to ride a bike, and explained why Mommy and Daddy were fighting again. When Camden was 5, he started asking why he couldn't live with me instead. "Your house is quieter," he said. "And you always have food in the refrigerator." That comment haunted me for weeks. What kind of chaos was this kid living with that my quiet, organized life seemed like paradise to him? I found out the following year when I stopped by their house unannounced. It was 3 p.m. on a Tuesday. Marcus was supposed to be at a job site, but his truck was in the driveway. Veronica was supposed to be running her jewelry business, but she was still in pajamas. Camden was sitting on the couch watching TV, still in yesterday's clothes, eating cereal for what I suspected was both breakfast and lunch. "Oh hey, Mel," Veronica said brightly, like everything was perfectly normal. "We were just having a lazy day." A lazy day. While their 8-year-old fended for himself and they slept until noon. I started paying closer attention after that. The house was always a disaster when I picked Camden up. Dishes piled in the sink, laundry everywhere, no groceries in the fridge. They were living like college students while I funded their lifestyle. And speaking of lifestyle, let me tell you about their social media presence. Veronica's Instagram was a carefully curated showcase of their blessed life. Photos of Camden's expensive toys with captions like, "So grateful we can give our son the best." Pictures of their date nights at fancy restaurants, date night at Giuseppe's. #blessed #married life. Videos of their weekend trips, quick getaway to the mountains. Sometimes you just need to recharge. What she didn't post, thanks to Mel for babysitting so we could go to Giuseppe's, or mountain cabin rental courtesy of Mel's emergency fund, or Camden's new bike was an early birthday gift from his amazing aunt. I was completely erased from their narrative. They got to be the successful, generous parents while I remained invisible. Marcus was even worse. His Facebook was full of humble brags about his thriving business. Another satisfied customer, he'd post next to photos of completed projects. Blackwood Brothers building continues to grow. What he didn't mention was that half his materials were purchased with my money and I was still the primary name on his business insurance. They were living a fantasy funded by my reality. But the most insidious part was how they'd normalized it all. Not just for themselves, but for me. "You're so lucky you don't have kids," Veronica would say. "You can afford to be generous. Must be nice to have all that disposable income," Marcus would add. "No college funds to worry about, no daycare bills." They'd turned my childlessness into a character flaw that somehow obligated me to subsidize their choices. Like I owed them compensation for not having children of my own. And I'd bought into it. Completely. I convinced myself that this was how families worked. The successful sibling helps the struggling ones. The aunt without children invests in her nephew's future. The person with stable income provides stability for everyone else. But looking at the patterns now, I could see it for what it really was, systematic manipulation disguised as family obligation. Every crisis was presented as urgent and temporary. Every request came with promises of repayment that never materialized. Every favor was framed as an opportunity for me to help or invest or contribute. And every time I hesitated, every time I suggested they might need to solve their own problems, I was made to feel selfish. "I guess we know where we stand with you," Veronica would say. "Family is supposed to stick together," Marcus would add. "Think about Camden," they'd both say. "Don't you want what's best for Camden?" Of course I wanted what's best for Camden. That's why I'd been funding his entire life for 8 years. But as I sat there reviewing the evidence, I realized something that should have been obvious years ago. What was best for Camden wasn't having parents who relied on outside funding to meet their basic obligations. What was best for Camden was having parents who took responsibility for their own choices. And what was best for me was finally admitting that I'd been enabling their dysfunction while calling it love. The manipulation tactics had been so subtle, so gradual, that I hadn't even realized I was being conditioned. Like a frog in slowly boiling water, I'd adapted to each new level of exploitation without recognizing the pattern. It started with language. Simple, innocent-sounding phrases that carried hidden meanings. "You're so good with money," they'd say, which translated to, "You should pay for things." "You don't understand the stress of having kids," meant, "Your problems don't matter as much as ours." "We're family," was code for, "You're obligated to help regardless of how we treat you." But the most insidious phrase was one Veronica used constantly: "You're so lucky. Lucky to have a good job. Lucky to be financially stable. Lucky to have freedom. Lucky, lucky, lucky." What she really meant was, your success is just random fortune, not something you earned, so you should share it with those of us who weren't as lucky. This framing completely erased my years of education, hard work, and responsible financial planning. It reduced my career achievements to mere chance, as if I'd won the lottery instead of earning 2 degrees and working 60-hour weeks to build my reputation at Pinnacle Wealth Management. When I got my CPA certification, Veronica's response was, "Must be nice to have time for studying." When I was promoted to senior analyst, Marcus said, "Some people get all the breaks." When I bought my house, my mother actually said, "Well, you can afford it. You don't have a family to support." Every achievement was diminished. Every success was luck. Every advantage was unearned privilege that I should feel guilty about having. Meanwhile, their failures were always external circumstances beyond their control. Marcus didn't lose clients because of poor workmanship, it was because people don't appreciate quality anymore. His business struggles weren't due to bad planning, it was because the economy is tough for small businesses. When he was late on payments to suppliers, it wasn't poor cash flow management, it was because big corporations squeeze out the little guy. Veronica's MLM failures weren't because the business model was fundamentally flawed, it was because people in this town don't support entrepreneurship. When her essential oils didn't sell, it wasn't because she had no sales skills, it was because people are closed-minded about natural wellness. They were never responsible for their circumstances. They were always victims of bad luck, unfair systems, or other people's shortcomings. But I was responsible for everything. Their problems became my problems. Their emergencies became my emergencies. Their poor planning became my obligation to fix. The guilt programming was masterful. "I hate to ask," Veronica would start every request, immediately putting me in the position of being cruel if I said no. "I know you're busy with your own life, but..." Followed by whatever crisis needed my immediate financial intervention. "You're the only one we can turn to," Marcus would say, making me feel simultaneously important and trapped. "Everyone else has their own problems, but you've always been there for us." The message was clear: saying no would make me a bad person. A selfish sister. An uncaring aunt. They'd perfected the art of making their requests seem reasonable by comparison to even bigger problems. "We only need $3,000 for the truck repair," Marcus would say. "It's not like we're asking you to buy us a house." Except they had asked me to help buy them a house. Multiple times. "It's just $500 for Camden's school fees," Veronica would add. Not like we're asking for a vacation or anything. Except I'd also funded several of their vacations. They'd also mastered the timeline manipulation. Every request was urgent. Every crisis required immediate action. There was never time to think it through, research alternatives, or suggest they handle it themselves. "The power company is shutting us off tomorrow if we don't pay," became a monthly emergency, even though utility bills are predictable monthly expenses that responsible adults plan for. "Camden needs these supplies for school Monday," even though the school supply list had been available for weeks. "The client wants an answer by end of business today," regarding projects that had been in negotiation for months. The urgency was always artificial, but it worked because it bypassed my rational thinking and triggered my emotional response to help family in crisis. And then there was the social pressure. They'd learned to make their requests in front of other family members, turning every gathering into a public referendum on my generosity. "Tell Aunt Melody about your field trip, Camden," Veronica would say at family dinners, knowing I'd never refused to fund a child's educational experience in front of my parents. "Marcus, didn't you have something to ask Melody?" she'd prompt during holiday gatherings, putting me on the spot to approve business loans while surrounded by relatives who judged me for being unsupportive. They'd also weaponized my love for Camden with surgical precision. Camden's really counting on that baseball camp, when I'd expressed hesitation about paying for expensive sports programs. It would break his heart if he can't go on the class trip with his friends, when I suggested they might need to budget for school activities themselves. "You're the only stable adult in his life," when I pointed out that his parents should be providing that stability. They'd made me feel responsible for Camden's happiness, his opportunities, his entire childhood experience. Any reluctance to fund his activities was reframed as me failing him personally. But perhaps the most manipulative tactic was how they'd rewritten my motivations for helping. When I paid for Camden's daycare, they told everyone I'd insisted on contributing because I loved being involved in his education. When I covered their mortgage payment during Marcus's slow season, it became Melody wanted to invest in the house, as if I was getting some kind of return on that investment. When I bought Camden's Christmas presents, they described it as me spoiling him because she doesn't have kids of her own to buy for. Every generous gesture was twisted into something selfish. Every sacrifice was reframed as self-interest. I wasn't helping them, I was fulfilling some personal need at their expense. This narrative served two purposes. It made them feel less guilty about taking my money, and it ensured that I never received proper credit or appreciation for my contributions. The conditioning ran so deep that I'd started policing my own thoughts. When I felt resentful about never being thanked, I'd tell myself, "You don't help people for gratitude." When I noticed they only called when they needed money, I'd think, "That's not fair. They're busy with their own lives." When I wanted to say no to a request, I'd remind myself, "Family comes first. You can afford it." I'd become my own prison warden, enforcing their rules even when they weren't around. But the most damaging conditioning was how they'd taught me to minimize my own needs and feelings. "You're so low maintenance," Veronica would say approvingly when I didn't ask for anything in return. "It's nice that you're not needy like some people," Marcus would add when I helped without complaint. Being low maintenance and not needy became my identity. Asking for anything, money, time, emotional support, even basic courtesy, would contradict this image they'd built of me. So I stopped asking. I stopped expecting. I stopped believing I deserved anything beyond the privilege of being useful to them. And that's how they'd managed to extract over $100,000 from me while maintaining the fiction that I was the lucky one. The blessed one. The one who should be grateful for the opportunity to help. Looking back now, I could see how every conversation had been carefully crafted to reinforce their worldview. They were the struggling heroes doing their best in difficult circumstances, and I was the fortunate bystander whose only value was my ability to make their lives easier. But what they'd failed to consider was that financial analysts are trained to recognize patterns. We're experts at identifying unsustainable systems and predicting their inevitable collapse. And their system? The one built on my endless generosity and willingness to accept crumbs of appreciation in exchange for mountains of sacrifice? It was about to crash spectacularly. The moment that shattered my illusions completely didn't happen at Christmas dinner. It happened 3 weeks earlier, on a gray December afternoon that started like any other Saturday. I was at Millbrook Valley Shopping Center, picking up last-minute supplies for Camden's upcoming science fair project. He'd called me Thursday night, voice small and worried, explaining that his volcano demonstration was due Monday and his parents had forgotten to buy the materials. Mom said she was too busy with her jewelry orders, he whispered into the phone. And Dad's working late every night this week. Can you help me, Aunt Melody? I don't want to get a bad grade. Of course I said yes. I always said yes. So there I was, pushing a cart through Target, gathering poster board, baking soda, vinegar, food coloring, and modeling clay. I'd already spent my morning researching volcano projects online and printing out instruction guides. The total came to $63, a small amount that would ensure Camden didn't fail his assignment because his parents couldn't be bothered to visit a store. As I loaded the bags into my car, I felt that familiar mixture of satisfaction and resentment. Satisfaction because I was helping Camden succeed. Resentment because this should have been his parents' responsibility. But I pushed the resentment down, like I always did. Family helps family. Camden shouldn't suffer because his parents were disorganized. I drove to their house on Maple Grove Drive, expecting to spend the afternoon helping Camden build his volcano and maybe explaining some basic geology concepts. Educational bonding time, as Veronica liked to call it. The front door was unlocked, which wasn't unusual. I called out as I entered, arms full of Target bags. "Camden? I've got your volcano supplies." Silence. I walked through the living room toward the kitchen, stepping over piles of laundry and toys. The house had that stale, lived-in smell that comes from poor ventilation and sporadic cleaning. "Hello? Anyone home?" That's when I heard voices coming from the back patio. Marcus and Veronica, talking loudly enough that I could make out words through the sliding glass door. I was about to announce my presence when I heard my name. "Melody's always looking for ways to feel important," Veronica was saying. She practically begged to help with the science project. I froze, bags still in my hands. "It's perfect," Marcus replied, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "She gets to play the helpful aunt, Camden gets his project done, and we don't have to waste our Saturday shopping for school crap." I almost felt bad about it, Veronica continued, but then I remembered she doesn't have kids of her own. This probably makes her feel useful. They laughed. Both of them. Long, comfortable laughs like they'd just shared the funniest joke in the world. "Where is she, anyway?" Marcus asked. "Still shopping, I think. She said she'd be here around 3. We've got time to finish this conversation." I glanced at my phone. 2:47 p.m. I was early. Speaking of Melody, Veronica's voice dropped to a more serious tone. "I've been thinking about Christmas." "What about it?" "Well, you know how she always goes overboard with Camden's presents? All those expensive educational toys and books and whatever." "Yeah, so this year, maybe we should dial it back a little. I mean, Camden's getting older. He's starting to notice that Aunt Melody's gifts are always way nicer than what we give him." My heart started pounding. "You think that's a problem?" Marcus asked. "I think it makes us look bad," Veronica said bluntly. "Like we can't provide for our own kid. And honestly, it's kind of inappropriate. She's not his parent." "True. Plus, those expensive gifts just make him want more expensive stuff. Then we look like the bad guys when we can't afford it." "Exactly. So I was thinking, what if we suggest she stick to gift cards this year? Something simple. That way Camden doesn't get all excited about some fancy present that makes our gifts look cheap by comparison." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Gift cards are kind of impersonal, though." "That's the point," Veronica said. "Camden needs to understand that his real family is what matters. Not his aunt who throws money around because she doesn't have anyone else to spend it on." The bags slipped from my hands, hitting the floor with a soft thud. Bottles of food coloring rolled across the hardwood. "Besides," Veronica continued, oblivious to the sound, "gift cards are what you give to people you don't really know well. Teachers, co-workers, distant relatives. It's perfect for someone like Melody." "Someone like Melody?" "You know what I mean. Someone who's involved, but not actually part of the core family. She tries so hard to be Camden's second mother, but she's just his aunt. There's a difference." Marcus laughed again. "You're terrible. But you're not wrong. Sometimes I think she forgets her place. Right? Like, we appreciate the help, obviously. The money, the babysitting, all of it. But there's a line, you know? And she keeps trying to cross it." I stood there in their kitchen, surrounded by the evidence of my shopping trip to help their son with homework they'd ignored, listening to them discuss my place in their lives like I was a hired service they were considering downgrading. "So we'll tell her gift cards only this year?" Marcus asked. "I'll handle it. I'll say something about teaching Camden the value of choice, or how gift cards help kids learn budgeting skills. Some educational spin. She eats that stuff up." And what about the other stuff? The emergency loans and business help and all that? Veronica sighed. What about it? That's different. That's actual family support. Important stuff. Not just showing off with expensive toys. Fair point. We definitely still need her help with the real stuff. Of course. I mean, we're family. She's never going to say no to genuinely helping family. That's when I heard the sliding door open and Camden's voice joined the conversation. Mom, when is Aunt Melody getting here? I want to start my volcano. Soon, sweetie. She's picking up supplies for you right now. Is she really? That's so nice. She always helps me with school stuff. Yes, well, that's what aunts are for, Veronica said, and I could hear the forced brightness in her voice. They help with little things like homework projects. Little things, Marcus added. Not the big, important stuff. That's what parents handle. I wish Aunt Melody was my mom sometimes, Camden said innocently. She never forgets about my projects, and she always explains things so I understand them. The silence that followed was deafening. Camden, Veronica said carefully, Aunt Melody is nice, but she's not your mother. I'm your mother. Daddy and I are your real family. I know that. I just meant. What Camden means, Marcus interrupted, is that Aunt Melody has more free time than we do because she doesn't have a family of her own. So she can focus on little things like school projects. But that doesn't make her more important than us. Oh, Camden said, sounding confused. I didn't mean she was more important. Of course not, baby, Veronica cooed. You know Mommy and Daddy love you most, right? Aunt Melody loves you too, but it's different. She's not, well, she's not really family like we are. My hands were shaking as I bent down to pick up the scattered supplies. Not really family. After 8 years of emergency loans, business investments, childcare, school projects, birthday parties, Christmas mornings, and countless hours of being Camden's emotional support system. Not really family. But she bought all this stuff for my volcano, Camden protested weakly. Because that's her job, Marcus said firmly. That's what people like Aunt Melody do. They help out where they can, with the small stuff, because they don't have big responsibilities like we do. People like Aunt Melody. I straightened up, supplies back in their bags, and made a decision that would change everything. I walked to the front door as quietly as I could, opened it, and slammed it shut hard enough to rattle the windows. Hello. I called out loudly. Sorry I'm late. Traffic was terrible. I heard scrambling from the patio, then footsteps rushing toward the kitchen. Melody. Veronica appeared, flushed and bright-eyed. Perfect timing. Camden's so excited about his volcano project. I bet he is, I said, setting the bags on their cluttered counter. I got everything on the list, plus some extra materials in case we want to make it really special. You're amazing, Marcus said, appearing behind his wife. Always going above and beyond. Well, I said, smiling, that's what people like me do, right? We help out where we can. Veronica's eyes flickered, just for a second, but she recovered quickly. Camden. Come tell Aunt Melody thank you for the supplies. As Camden bounded into the kitchen, chattering excitedly about lava and chemical reactions, I realized something profound had shifted inside me. The mask hadn't just slipped. It had been completely torn away. And for the first time in 8 years, I saw them exactly as they were. The 3 weeks between the patio conversation and Christmas dinner were a masterclass in psychological warfare, though only I knew the battle was being fought. I spent those weeks watching Marcus and Veronica with new eyes, seeing their manipulation tactics in real time instead of falling victim to them. It was like having a decoder ring for their behavior. Suddenly every conversation, every request, every seemingly innocent comment revealed its true purpose. The very next day after overhearing their discussion, Veronica called with what she presented as exciting news. Mel, I've been thinking about Christmas gifts this year, she said, voice bright with artificial enthusiasm. Marcus and I want to try something different with Camden. Something more educational. I waited, curious to see how she'd spin this. We think it would be really valuable for him to learn about making choices and budgeting. You know, real-world skills that will help him as he gets older. That sounds interesting, I said neutrally. So we were wondering if maybe this year you could get him a gift card instead of picking out specific presents. That way he can practice making his own purchasing decisions, weighing options, comparing prices. It's actually much more thoughtful when you think about it. The audacity was breathtaking. She was asking me to downgrade my gift giving while presenting it as an upgrade in thoughtfulness. A gift card, I repeated. Exactly. Maybe Target or GameStop, somewhere with lots of options. And honestly, Mel, it would take so much pressure off you. No more stress about picking the perfect present or worrying whether he'll like it. Just clean, simple, educational. Clean. Simple. Educational. The same words she'd used on the patio when she described gift cards as appropriate for people like me. That's such a thoughtful suggestion, Veronica, I said. You've really given this a lot of consideration. I have. I'm always thinking about what's best for Camden's development. Sure she was. What was best for Camden's development was apparently learning that his aunt was a distant relative who gave him personal gifts, while his parents were the only ones who truly mattered. But I agreed to the gift card idea, much to her obvious relief. What she didn't know was that I was already forming a much bigger plan. Over the following days, the setup continued. Marcus called about a small favor regarding his business insurance renewal. The premium had gone up, and he was having cash flow issues. Could I cover the difference? Just this once? Just until the Henderson project payment came through in January? It's only $1,200, he said, like that made it insignificant. I know it's not much to you, but it would really save my ass right now. I agreed, but this time I paid attention to how the request was structured. The false intimacy, save my ass, the minimization of the amount, only $1,200, not much to you, the artificial timeline, just until January, and the underlying assumption that my money was available for his convenience. 2 days later, Veronica needed help with Camden's winter clothes. He'd outgrown everything, and they'd already spent their clothing budget on Christmas presents for extended family. I hate to ask, she started, her standard opening that was designed to make me feel guilty for even considering saying no, but could you maybe pick up some basics for him? Nothing fancy, just jeans and sweaters and maybe a new winter coat. I'd do it myself, but with the jewelry business ramping up for holiday orders. The jewelry business that hadn't made a profit in 18 months. The holiday orders that consisted of 3 custom bracelets for her coworkers. But I agreed to this too, spending $340 at Children's Place while she spent the afternoon posting Instagram stories about her busy entrepreneur life. The most revealing incident happened exactly 1 week before Christmas. I got a call from Camden's school. Apparently there was an issue with his lunch account balance. It was negative by $47, and they needed immediate payment to avoid having him moved to the free lunch program. When I called Veronica about it, her response was telling. Oh my God, I completely forgot about lunch money. Thank goodness they called you instead of me. Can you just handle it? You know I'm terrible with keeping track of school stuff. She wasn't terrible with keeping track of school stuff. She was strategically incompetent. By positioning herself as helpless with administrative tasks, she'd trained everyone, the school, Camden, even my parents, to call me first when issues arose. But here's what really showed me how deep the manipulation went. When I arrived at the school to pay Camden's lunch balance, the secretary thanked me for being such a dedicated aunt. Camden talks about you all the time, she said warmly. It's so nice that he has you looking out for him. Not every child is that lucky. I realized that Camden's teachers, his classmates' parents, even the administrative staff all saw me as his primary support system. They'd been trained to view me as the responsible adult in his life because Marcus and Veronica had systematically abdicated that role. When school forms needed signatures, they forgot, until the last minute, then asked me to handle it since I was so much better with paperwork. When parent-teacher conferences were scheduled, they'd have work conflicts and suggest I attend since I was more involved in his education anyway. When field trip permission slips came home, they'd immediately forward them to me because I was better at reading the fine print. They'd positioned themselves as the fun, loving parents while making me the responsible, administrative aunt. They got the credit for Camden's happiness, I got the liability for his welfare. And the financial manipulation was even more systematic than I'd realized. I started tracking their spending patterns during those 3 weeks, cross-referencing their social media posts with their requests for my help. The results were staggering. The same week Marcus asked me to cover his insurance premium because of cash flow issues, he posted pictures of a guy's night out at Riverside Brewing Company, a place where beer starts at $12 and dinner runs $40 per person. The same day Veronica claimed they couldn't afford Camden's winter clothes, she posted an Instagram story from Serenity Spa, showing off her new gel manicure and facial package. They weren't struggling with money. They were struggling with priorities. My money funded their necessities so their money could fund their luxuries. But the most manipulative behavior was how they'd trained Camden to be complicit in their system. Ask Aunt Melody about your field trip, Veronica would prompt when Camden mentioned upcoming school events. See if Aunt Melody can help with your science fair supplies, Marcus would suggest when Camden had homework assignments. Maybe Aunt Melody would like to take you shopping for new soccer cleats, they'd both say when Camden needed sports equipment. They'd taught him that I was the solution to any need or want, while positioning themselves as the people who truly loved him. I was the ATM, they were the family. And Camden, being 8 years old, had internalized this dynamic completely. When he needed something practical, he thought of me. When he wanted emotional comfort, he went to them. I'd been relegated to the role of fairy godmother, magical and generous, but not actually part of the core family unit. The most painful example happened just 4 days before Christmas. Camden called me after school, excited about a winter concert where his class would be singing holiday songs. Aunt Melody, will you come to my concert? It's next Tuesday at 7. Of course, Camden. I'd love to be there. Great. Mom and Dad said they might be too busy, but they knew you'd want to come. They might be too busy for their own son's school concert. But they knew I'd want to come, like attending Camden's milestones was my hobby rather than their responsibility. I hung up that phone call with crystal clarity about what was happening. They'd outsourced parenting to me while maintaining the appearance of being good parents. I funded Camden's needs, attended his events, helped with his homework, and provided emotional support, while they got to be the relaxed, fun parents who weren't bogged down by day-to-day responsibilities. But the setup for Christmas dinner was the most calculated manipulation of all. 3 days before the family gathering, Veronica called with what she framed as a helpful heads-up. Just so you know, we've been talking to Camden about being grateful for all gifts, no matter what they are, she said. We want him to understand that it's the thought that counts, not how much money someone spends. She was priming Camden to react appropriately to the gift card, but she was also planting seeds for the public humiliation that was coming. That's good parenting, I said. Thanks. We've also been explaining that different people show love in different ways. Some people like to spend time together, some people give handmade gifts, and some people prefer practical presents like gift cards. Practical presents. Like gift cards. From people who prefer practical presents. She was setting up the narrative where my choice to give a gift card would be interpreted as a reflection of my character rather than a response to her specific request. Marcus even explained to Camden that gift cards are what busy adults give when they can't make time for personal shopping, she continued. It's important for him to understand how the adult world works. The trap was perfectly constructed. If I gave Camden the gift card she'd specifically requested, I'd be publicly demonstrating that I was too busy and impersonal to give real gifts. If I ignored her request and gave expensive presents instead, I'd be the aunt who couldn't follow simple directions and always had to show off. But what Veronica didn't realize was that I'd been documenting everything. Every conversation, every request, every manipulation tactic. I had text messages, email chains, bank records, and a detailed timeline of their behavior. She thought she was setting a trap for me. She had no idea I was setting a much bigger trap for all of them. The night before Christmas dinner, I sat in my home office with a cup of coffee and my laptop, staring at a blank document that would change everything. Outside, snow was falling gently on Willowbrook Lane, creating the kind of peaceful winter scene that should have filled me with holiday warmth. Instead, I felt the cold clarity that comes with finally seeing the truth. I'd spent the last 3 weeks documenting every manipulation, every lie, every calculated move they'd made. Now it was time to decide what to do with that information. The obvious choice was confrontation. I could show up at Christmas dinner armed with bank statements, text message screenshots, and a detailed breakdown of their exploitation. I could expose their manipulation in front of the entire extended family, humiliate them the way they planned to humiliate me. But that would only give them what they wanted: drama. Chaos. An excuse to paint me as the unstable sister who couldn't handle family dynamics. They'd turn themselves into victims of my financial abuse and emotional manipulation. No. That wasn't the right approach. I opened my banking app and started transferring money. Not to them, from them. Every automatic payment, every recurring transfer, every standing authorization that had been set up over the years to make their lives easier. Marcus's business insurance that auto-paid from my account. Camden's daycare fees that came out of my checking every month. The utilities for their house that they'd added my card to, just temporarily, 3 years ago. One by one, I canceled them all. Then I moved to the bigger items. The joint savings account I'd set up for Camden's college fund, technically my account that I'd added their names to for transparency. I transferred the entire $23,000 to a new account in my name only. Their names came off as authorized users. The investment portfolio I'd built for Marcus's business, $15,000 in bonds and mutual funds that I'd purchased as company assets, but were legally in my name since his credit couldn't qualify for the investment accounts. I liquidated everything and moved it to my personal retirement fund. The car loan for Veronica's Honda CR-V that I'd co-signed when her credit was too poor to qualify a loan. I called the bank and removed myself as guarantor, effective immediately. Let them deal with the payment adjustment. Every financial thread that connected me to their lives, I carefully severed. But money was just the beginning. I opened my contacts and started making calls. First, Camden's school. Hi, this is Melody Chen. I need to remove myself as an emergency contact and authorized pickup person for Camden Blackwood. Please update his file to show that only his parents, Marcus and Veronica Blackwood, should be contacted regarding any issues. The secretary sounded confused. Ms. Chen, you've been Camden's primary emergency contact for 3 years. Are you sure about this change? Completely sure. It's time for his parents to take full responsibility for their son's school-related needs. Next, I called Dr. Patricia Williams, Camden's pediatrician. Same conversation. Remove me from authorized contacts. No more approving appointments, paying bills, or handling medical decisions. Parents only. Then Camden's soccer league, his piano teacher, his after-school tutoring program. Every organization where I'd been listed as backup support, financial guarantor, or emergency contact. I systematically erased myself from Camden's support network. But the most important call was to my lawyer, David Harrison. David, I need you to review some financial documents and draft a few letters for me, I said. I've been providing informal loans and financial support to family members, and I want to formalize the terms. Are we talking about significant amounts? Just over $100,000 in various loans and investments over 6 years. David whistled. Melody, please tell me you have documentation for all of this. Extensive documentation. Bank transfers, text message acknowledgements, email agreements. I work in finance, David. I document everything. Good. What kind of formalization are you looking for? I want proper loan agreements drawn up for everything that was supposed to be repaid. Market interest rates, standard terms, legally enforceable payment schedules. And I want demand letters sent for anything that's currently past due. This is going to surprise your family. That's the point. The next step was the most emotionally difficult, calling my parents. Mom, I need to talk to you and Dad about something important. Of course, sweetheart. Is everything all right? I'll be making some changes after Christmas regarding my financial support for Marcus and Veronica. I wanted you to hear it from me first. There was a long pause. What kind of changes? I'll be stepping back from providing loans and emergency assistance. They're adults with their own family to support. It's time for them to handle their own finances. Melody, they depend on you. Veronica's business is just getting started, and Marcus's company has been struggling with the economy. And there it was. Even my parents had bought into the narrative that my siblings' failures were external circumstances requiring my intervention, while my success was just luck that should be shared. Mom, I've been providing financial support for 6 years. If they're not self-sufficient by now, my continued help isn't going to change that. But what about Camden? You can't punish him for his parents' mistakes. The manipulation was so automatic, so reflexive, that my own mother deployed it without thinking. Anytime I considered protecting my own interests, it was punishing Camden. Camden has 2 parents who are responsible for his welfare, I said calmly. I'm his aunt, not his guardian. After I hung up, I sat in the quiet of my office and felt something I hadn't experienced in years, peace. Not the temporary relief that comes from solving someone else's crisis, but the deep, sustainable peace that comes from setting boundaries. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't resentful. I wasn't even hurt, really. I was just done. The final step was writing the email I'd send after Christmas dinner. Not before. I wanted to see their performance first. I wanted to watch them execute their plan to humiliate me with the gift card incident, secure in their belief that I'd continue funding their lives no matter how they treated me. The email was simple and professional. After careful consideration, I've decided to restructure my financial relationships with family members to ensure everything is properly documented and legally sound. Please review the attached loan agreements and payment schedules prepared by my attorney. All outstanding balances are now subject to standard market interest rates and formal repayment terms. Additionally, I'm stepping back from providing emergency financial assistance, co-signing arrangements, and informal loans. This change will allow you to develop greater financial independence and self-reliance. I've also removed myself from all emergency contact lists and financial responsibilities related to Camden's care, as these are appropriately handled by his parents. These changes take effect January 1st. Please direct any questions to my attorney, whose contact information is included below. No emotion. No accusations. No drama. Just business. I saved the email in my drafts folder and closed the laptop. Tomorrow, they would spring their trap. Camden would deliver his little speech about gift cards being for losers, the family would laugh at my expense, and Marcus and Veronica would feel clever about putting me in my place. What they didn't know was that their distant relative, who gave practical gifts, had just removed herself from their lives entirely. They wanted me to know my place? Fine. My place was as far away from their dysfunction as possible. But first, I had one more Christmas dinner to attend. One last performance to watch. One final demonstration of exactly who I was dealing with before I walked away forever. I went to bed that night with my phone on silent, my boundaries firmly set, and a plan that would give them exactly what they'd asked for, a relationship with me that was appropriately distant, impersonal, and practical. They just had no idea how distant it was going to be. The alarm went off at 7 a.m. Christmas morning. I got up, showered, dressed in my best outfit, and wrapped Camden's gift card in beautiful paper with an elaborate bow. Time for the final act. Christmas morning arrived crisp and clear, the kind of winter day that makes everything look like a postcard. I stood in my kitchen sipping coffee and watching the sunrise paint my backyard golden, feeling remarkably calm for someone about to detonate her entire family structure. I dressed carefully, not for them, but for me. A deep burgundy sweater that brought out my eyes, my favorite silver jewelry, boots that made me feel confident. If this was going to be my last performance as the family ATM, I was going to look the part of someone who had her life together. The gift card sat on my counter, wrapped in expensive paper with a velvet ribbon. $100 to Target, exactly as requested. But tucked inside the card was something Veronica hadn't expected, a handwritten note explaining my thought process. Dear Camden, I'd written, I chose this gift card because your parents specifically requested it. They felt it would be educational for you to learn about making purchasing decisions and budgeting. I hope you enjoy the experience of choosing something special for yourself. Love, Aunt Melody. Let them explain that to the family. I arrived at my parents' house on Elmwood Drive at exactly 2 p.m., fashionably on time as always. The driveway was already crowded with cars, Uncle George's pickup truck, Cousin Derek's minivan, Aunt Lucinda's sedan. The whole extended family was there, just as I'd expected. Inside, the house buzzed with typical Christmas chaos. Kids running around in new pajamas, adults clustered around the dining room table that groaned under the weight of too much food, the artificial tree blinking with multicolored lights that gave everyone a festive glow. Melody. My mother rushed over, arms outstretched. Merry Christmas, sweetheart. The hug lasted a beat too long. She was nervous, probably remembering our conversation from the day before. Good. Merry Christmas, Mom. Everything looks beautiful. Veronica appeared at my elbow almost immediately, as if she'd been watching for my arrival. Mel. I was just telling everyone you'd be here soon. Her smile was bright and plastic, the kind reserved for people she was about to manipulate. Camden's been asking about you all morning. How sweet, I said neutrally. I'm excited to see him. He's in the living room with the other kids. Why don't you go say hello? Of course she wanted me to go straight to Camden. This was all part of the choreography, get me to the children first, surrounded by witnesses, maximum impact when the gift card moment arrived. I found Camden on the floor with his cousins, surrounded by wrapping paper and new toys. He looked up when I entered, his face lighting up with genuine happiness. Aunt Melody. You made it. Of course I did, sweetheart. Merry Christmas. He jumped up to hug me, and for a moment, my resolve wavered. This wasn't his fault. He was just a kid caught in the middle of his parents' dysfunction. But then I heard Marcus's voice from the kitchen, loud enough to carry, yeah, Melody always shows up. She never misses a chance to play the perfect aunt. The comment was meant to sound affectionate, but I caught the edge in it. He was already setting the stage, establishing the narrative that my presence was performative rather than genuine. I have something for you, I told Camden, pulling the wrapped gift from my bag. Can I open it now? His eyes were bright with excitement. Actually, let's wait until everyone's together. I think your parents want to watch you open presents as a family. That was true, though not for the sentimental reasons Camden assumed. They wanted an audience for what came next. The next hour passed in predictable holiday rhythms. Food was passed around, wine was poured, children were corralled for pictures. I played my part perfectly, the successful, single aunt who was delighted to be included in family festivities. Marcus regaled everyone with stories about his construction projects, carefully omitting the financial disasters I'd helped him avoid. Veronica showed off her latest jewelry designs, failing to mention that the materials had been purchased with my credit card. My parents beamed at their children's apparent success. Finally, after dinner, my mother suggested we move to the living room for presents. The kids have been so patient, she announced. I think it's time for the Christmas finale. Everyone gathered in the living room, adults settling into chairs and couches while children sat cross-legged on the floor surrounded by colorfully wrapped packages. The scene could have been pulled from a Norman Rockwell painting. Except Norman Rockwell never painted family sabotage. Okay, kids, Uncle George called out, one at a time so we can all see. The children took turns opening gifts with theatrical enthusiasm. Each present was examined, exclaimed over, and held up for the room to admire. Parents beamed as their thoughtful selections were revealed: art supplies for creative souls, sports equipment for active kids, books for the readers. Camden went last, as I'd expected. By the time his turn arrived, the living room was strewn with wrapping paper and the adults were getting restless. Perfect timing for maximum impact. Camden, don't forget Aunt Melody's present. Veronica called out, her voice carrying that special brightness that meant trouble was coming. Camden picked up my gift, shaking it experimentally. It doesn't rattle, he observed. Not everything fun makes noise, I said mildly. He tore off the wrapping paper with the same enthusiasm he'd shown for every other gift, then stopped when he saw what was inside. A Target gift card in a simple plastic sleeve. The room went quiet. Not the expectant quiet that comes before excitement, but the uncomfortable quiet that comes when something awkward happens. Camden stared at the gift card for a moment, then looked up at me with confusion. It's a gift card. Yes, I said calmly. $100 to Target. You can buy anything you want. That's when Marcus delivered his line, right on cue. Well, Camden, what do you say to Aunt Melody for her thoughtful gift? The emphasis on thoughtful was subtle but unmistakable. Just enough sarcasm to make the point without being overtly rude. Camden looked uncertain, glancing between his parents and me. Thank you, Aunt Melody. It came out like a question, as if he wasn't sure thanking me was the right response. You're very welcome, sweetheart, I said warmly. But Marcus wasn't done. A gift card, huh? That's practical. There was that word again. Practical. The same word he'd used at dinner 3 weeks ago when explaining why gift cards were inferior to real gifts. Veronica jumped in to help. It's very modern. Kids today love having choices, don't they, Camden? Camden nodded uncertainly, clearly sensing the undercurrent but not understanding it. That's when 8-year-old Camden delivered the line his father had taught him, the words that would change everything. Dad says only losers give gift cards because they're too lazy to think of real presents. The silence that followed was deafening. 23 family members, all staring at me while Camden stood there holding my gift, having just called me a loser with words that had obviously come from his father's mouth. Marcus didn't even have the grace to look embarrassed. He just shrugged, as if his son had stated an obvious fact. And that's when I smiled. Not a hurt smile or an angry smile, but a genuinely pleased smile. The smile of someone who had just been handed exactly what she needed. You know what, Camden? I said, standing up from my chair. Your dad is absolutely right. The room held its breath. Gift cards are exactly what you give when you don't really know someone. When you're not actually close to them. When you're just distant relatives. I picked up my purse and coat. Thank you all for helping me understand my place in this family. It's going to make the new year so much simpler. And with that, I walked out of my parents' house and out of their lives forever. The show was over. Now came the real performance. I drove home in perfect silence, my phone buzzing incessantly on the passenger seat. I didn't look at it. Not yet. First, I needed to complete the task I'd started the night before. I walked into my home office, opened my laptop, and clicked send on the email I'd drafted. The one with the lawyer's letterhead, the formal loan agreements, and the payment schedules that would turn 6 years of family help into legally enforceable debt. Then I poured myself a glass of wine and finally looked at my phone. 14 missed calls. 37 text messages. And counting. The first wave had come within minutes of my departure. Mom, Melody, please come back. We need to talk about this. Dad, that was unnecessary. Camden is just a child. Veronica, what the hell was that about? Call me now. But as the evening progressed, the tone shifted dramatically. By 6 p.m., confusion had set in. Marcus, why is my business insurance saying my policy is cancelled? Veronica, the bank called about our car payment. They said something about the cosigner being removed. Mom, Melody, Camden's school called us about emergency contacts. What's going on? By 8 p.m., panic was evident. Veronica, I can't access Camden's college fund account. The bank says I'm not authorized anymore. Call me. Marcus, Melody, this isn't funny. I have suppliers calling about payment guarantees. Fix this. Dad, your mother is very upset. This has gone far enough. By 10 p.m., the begging had started. Veronica, please don't do this to Camden. He's innocent in all this. Marcus, look, maybe I was out of line with the gift card thing. But this is extreme. Mom, sweetheart, family forgives. Let's talk tomorrow and work this out. I read each message with detached interest, like studying specimens under a microscope. The progression from entitlement to confusion to panic to desperation was textbook. They'd built their entire financial structure around my support, and I'd just pulled out the foundation. But the real entertainment started the next morning. My phone rang at 7:23 a.m. Marcus. I answered on the fourth ring. Good morning. Melody, what the fuck did you do? His voice was strained, desperate. I just got a call from my attorney. He says you're demanding payment on loans I didn't even know were being documented. Language, Marcus. It's barely 7:30. Don't give me that calm bullshit. You can't just, this is illegal. You can't retroactively call family help loans and charge interest. Actually, I can. David Harrison is an excellent attorney, and everything was properly documented. Bank transfers with notation purposes, text message acknowledgments of debt, email agreements to repay. It's all legally sound. Those weren't loans. That was family helping family. According to the communication records, you specifically called them loans and promised repayment. Multiple times. With witnesses present. The silence stretched for nearly 30 seconds. How much? He asked finally. For you personally? $47,000 in principal, plus accumulated interest at market rates. Your payment schedule is attached to the formal notice. 47. Are you insane? I don't have $47,000. That's unfortunate. The first payment is due February 1st, $1,500. Melody, be reasonable. You know I can't. Then perhaps you should have been more reasonable before teaching your son to call me a loser in front of our entire family. I hung up. The second call came 20 minutes later. Veronica, sobbing. Mel, please. I'm begging you. Don't do this to us. I'm not doing anything to you. I'm simply formalizing financial arrangements that should have been proper contracts from the beginning. Those weren't contracts. You offered to help. I offered to loan you money. You promised to pay it back. I have text messages where you explicitly use the word loan and repay. My attorney was very thorough in his review. But we can't afford the house payment, the car payment, Camden school. That's not my responsibility anymore. You made it very clear yesterday that I'm a distant relative who gives impersonal gifts. Distant relatives don't subsidize your lifestyle. I never said you were distant. Camden said that thing about gift cards because his father taught him to say it. We both know that, Veronica. Marcus has been undermining my relationship with Camden for months, and you've been helping him. That's not. I heard you on your patio 3 weeks ago. I heard every word. The silence was complete. You heard. She whispered. Everything. Your discussion about gift cards being appropriate for people like me. Your explanation that I'm not really family like you are. Your plan to teach Camden that I'm just the aunt who throws money around because I don't have anyone else to spend it on. Melody, we didn't mean. You meant every word. And now you're dealing with the consequences. The third call was my mother, using her most disappointed voice. Melody rose chin, I am appalled by your behavior. Hello, mother. Cutting off financial support for your own family? Demanding money from people who are struggling? This is not how I raised you. Actually, this is exactly how you raised me. You taught me to honor my commitments, document important agreements, and not let people take advantage of my generosity. This isn't generosity, it's vindictiveness. No, Mother, generosity is what I've been showing for 6 years. This is business. Camden called here this morning asking if he did something wrong. That poor child thinks he caused this whole situation. And there it was. The weapon they always used when rational arguments failed, Camden's emotional welfare. Camden's emotional welfare is his parents' responsibility, not mine. How can you be so cold? I'm not being cold. I'm being clear. Marcus and Veronica wanted me to understand my place in this family, and I do. I'm the distant relative who gives practical gifts and has no real relationship with their son. People in that category don't provide ongoing financial support. You're destroying this family over a child's innocent comment. I'm not destroying anything. I'm just no longer rebuilding what they keep tearing down. By afternoon, the messages had become increasingly frantic. Marcus, I talked to a lawyer. He says you can't do this without warning. Me, check your email. Formal notice was sent certified mail yesterday. You'll receive it today. Veronica, Camden keeps asking why Aunt Melody is mad at him. What am I supposed to tell him? Me, tell him the truth. His parents can't afford the lifestyle they've been living and can no longer depend on outside funding. Mom, your father wants you to call him immediately. Me, I'm busy. Dad, Melody, we raised you better than this. Family comes first. Me, I agree. Marcus and Veronica should put their family first by taking responsibility for their own finances. But the call that revealed just how desperate they'd become came that evening. My phone rang at 8:47 p.m. with a number I didn't recognize. Aunt Melody? Camden's small voice on the other end made my chest tighten. Hi, sweetie. I'm sorry about what I said yesterday. About gift cards. I didn't mean to make you mad. My heart broke for him. This wasn't his fight, but his parents had dragged him into it anyway. Camden, you didn't make me mad. You just repeated something your dad told you to say. I know, but... Mom's been crying a lot, and Dad keeps yelling at people on the phone. Did I break our family? The manipulation was breathtaking. They'd given an 8-year-old their phone to call me, hoping his innocent distress would guilt me into backing down. No, sweetheart. You didn't break anything. Sometimes grown-ups have to make difficult decisions about money and responsibility. But you're not coming to my birthday party next month, are you? I closed my eyes. They'd told him I wouldn't be at his birthday party. Of course they had. Camden, I want you to remember something important. I love you very much, and nothing that's happening between the grown-ups changes that. But sometimes people need space to figure things out. Okay, he said sadly. I miss you. I miss you too. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen and cried for the first time since this whole thing started. Not for Marcus and Veronica, they'd made their choices. But for Camden, who was paying the price for his parents' greed and manipulation. But I didn't change my mind. By the time I went to bed that night, my phone showed 63 missed calls and over 100 text messages. The panic was complete. Their entire financial house of cards was collapsing, and they had no idea how to function without my support. Tomorrow would bring lawyers, threats, and increasingly desperate attempts to make me feel guilty for protecting my own interests. But tonight, for the first time in 6 years, I slept peacefully knowing that I was nobody's emergency fund. 3 months later, I was living a completely different life. I woke up each morning in my quiet house on Willowbrook Lane without checking my phone for crisis messages. I had coffee on my back patio without wondering which family member would need emergency funding before noon. I went to work focused on my own projects instead of calculating how much money I could spare for someone else's poor planning. The silence was extraordinary. My phone, which had buzzed constantly with family emergencies for 6 years, now received normal communications. Work emails. Friends making dinner plans. My dentist confirming appointments. The mundane, peaceful interactions of a person whose boundaries were respected. The legal proceedings had been swift and decisive. David Harrison was everything I'd hoped for in an attorney, thorough, professional, and completely unsympathetic to sob stories about family loyalty. Marcus's first payment had been due February 1st. He'd missed it, naturally, sending instead a rambling text about how I was destroying his business over a misunderstanding. David sent a formal notice of default. Marcus paid $800 of the required $1,500, along with a note claiming that was all he could manage right now. David's response was beautifully clinical. Partial payments were not acceptable under the terms of the agreement. Full payment or collection procedures would begin. Marcus paid the remaining $700 the next day. Veronica had been more creative in her resistance. She tried claiming that several of the documented loans were actually gifts that I was illegally trying to recover. David had presented her with printed copies of text message conversations where she'd specifically used phrases like, "I'll pay you back next month," and "thanks for the loan." Her attorney, a bargain basement family law practitioner she'd found on Craigslist, had lasted exactly one meeting before advising her to settle rather than face a court battle she couldn't win. But the most satisfying part wasn't the money. It was watching them learn to function without me. Marcus's business insurance had lapsed when I removed my financial guarantee. He'd scrambled to find new coverage but discovered that his credit history made him a high-risk client. The premiums for solo coverage were nearly triple what he'd been paying under my backing. Two of his major clients had pulled contracts when they learned his projects were no longer backed by my financial guarantee. Word travels fast in the construction industry, and Marcus's reputation for cost overruns and payment delays had caught up with him. He'd been forced to downsize significantly. The fancy office space he'd rented in Riverside Heights was gone, replaced by a home office in their basement. The company truck had been repossessed. His grand plans for Blackwood Brothers building had become a one-man handyman service operating out of a 10-year-old van. Veronica's adjustments had been even more dramatic. Without my emergency funding, they'd been forced to make actual budgets and stick to them. The impromptu spa days and restaurant dinners had stopped abruptly. Her jewelry business, no longer subsidized by my credit cards, had collapsed entirely when she couldn't afford new inventory. They'd been forced to sell the house in Maplewood Estates. The beautiful 4-bedroom colonial that I'd helped them buy was now owned by a young couple with actual down payment money and stable credit. Marcus and Veronica had moved to a small rental duplex on the other side of town, in a neighborhood where the houses needed paint and the yards needed work. Camden had been enrolled in public school instead of the private academy I'd been funding. Not because public school was inherently worse, but because it represented a significant downgrade in their lifestyle aspirations. Through mutual friends, I'd heard about their adjustment period. Veronica had been spotted shopping at discount grocery stores, clipping coupons, buying generic brands. Marcus had taken a part-time job at Henderson Construction, working for his former competitor because his own business couldn't generate enough income. They were learning to live within their means for the first time in their adult lives. My parents had been the most persistent in their attempts to guilt me back into the family ATM role. Weekly phone calls about how I was tearing the family apart and punishing innocent children. Monthly invitations to family gatherings where I could make things right again. I declined all of it. The breakthrough came in March, during an unexpected visit from my father. He appeared at my door on a Saturday morning, looking older and more tired than I remembered. "We need to talk," he said without preamble. I let him in and made coffee while he sat at my kitchen table, clearly struggling with whatever he'd come to say. "Your mother thinks I should demand you apologize and make things right," he began finally. "She thinks this whole situation is your fault for being vindictive. And what do you think?" He was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee cup. "I think," he said slowly, "that I never really paid attention to how much you were doing for them. Your mother and I, we assumed you liked helping. You never complained." "I didn't think I was allowed to complain." "That's what Marcus said. That you never complained, so everything must have been fine." I waited. But last week, Camden asked me something that made me think. Dad looked up from his coffee. He asked why Aunt Melody stopped loving him. And when I tried to explain that you still loved him but were having grown-up problems with his parents, he said something that broke my heart. "What did he say?" "He said, but Aunt Melody was the only one who always kept her promises. The words hung in the air between us. Marcus promised to take him camping last summer. Never happened. Veronica promised to help with his science fair project. I ended up doing it the night before it was due. You're the one who showed up for school concerts, bought birthday presents, remembered soccer game schedules. Dad rubbed his forehead. I realized that somewhere along the way, you became Camden's most reliable parent figure. And instead of being grateful, we all just expected it. Dad. No, let me finish. I came here to convince you to forgive them and go back to helping. But sitting here, thinking about what Camden said, I realized something else. He looked at me directly for the first time since arriving. You weren't helping them. You were enabling them. And maybe they needed to learn to stand on their own feet. It was the closest thing to an apology I was going to get, and I appreciated it more than I'd expected. How are they doing? Really? Dad sighed. Struggling. But for the first time in years, they're actually solving their own problems instead of calling you every time something goes wrong. Marcus got that job with Henderson, and Veronica's been doing bookkeeping for small businesses. They're growing up, I guess. And Camden? Missing you terribly. But he's also seeing his parents take responsibility for things instead of passing them off to someone else. That might be good for him in the long run. After Dad left, I sat on my patio and thought about Camden. The hardest part of all this wasn't the money or the family drama, it was losing my relationship with him. He was 8 years old, innocent in all of this, and I missed him more than I'd expected. But I also knew that my old relationship with Camden hadn't been healthy for anyone. I'd been functioning as a third parent while his actual parents had been functioning as fun older siblings. That dynamic had been damaging to all of us. Maybe, someday, when he was older and could understand the complexity of adult relationships, we could rebuild something authentic. A relationship based on genuine affection rather than financial dependence. For now, though, I was learning to live my own life. I'd started dating again, something I hadn't had time for when I was constantly managing other people's crises. I'd joined a hiking club and discovered I loved spending weekends in the mountains. I'd renovated my guest bathroom and planted a garden and read books that had nothing to do with family drama. I was remembering who I was when I wasn't defined by other people's needs. The peace was addictive. The freedom was intoxicating. For the first time in 6 years, I was living for myself. And I'd never been happier. 6 months after that Christmas dinner, I was sitting in my favorite coffee shop on Main Street, reading a book and enjoying my Saturday morning routine, when someone tapped my shoulder. "Excuse me, are you Melody Chin?" I looked up to see a woman in her 30s with tired eyes and a nervous smile. She looked familiar, but I couldn't place her. "Yes, I am. I'm Sarah Martinez. I work with Veronica at Pinnacle Accounting Services." She gestured to the empty chair across from me. "Could I talk to you for a minute? It's about your sister." Intrigued, I closed my book and nodded for her to sit. "I hope this isn't weird," Sarah began, "but Veronica talks about you sometimes. About what happened with your family." I waited, unsure where this was going. "The thing is," Sarah continued, "your story made me realize something about my own situation. I have a brother who, well, he's been taking advantage of me financially for years. And listening to Veronica describe how you handled things, it gave me the courage to finally set some boundaries. This was not what I'd expected." "Veronica told you about our situation?" Sarah laughed, but not unkindly. "She talks about you a lot, actually. At first, it was all anger and resentment. How you'd abandoned the family, how you were being selfish and vindictive. But recently it's been different." "Different how?" "She's been talking about how you were right. How she and Marcus had been taking advantage of your generosity for years without even realizing it. She said you were the smartest person she knew, and she'd been too proud to admit that you were trying to teach them something important." I set my coffee cup down carefully. "Veronica said that?" "Last week, she told me that cutting off your financial support was the best thing that ever happened to their marriage. She said they'd been living like children, letting you handle all the adult responsibilities while they played house with your money. Sarah leaned forward. But here's the thing that really got to me. She said that when you walked away, it wasn't just about the money. It was about respect. You were demanding to be treated like a person instead of a bank account, and they'd been too selfish to see it. My throat felt tight. She really said that? She did. And it made me look at my own situation differently. My brother Jake has been borrowing money from me for 3 years. Car payments, rent, even his girlfriend's credit card bills. And like you, I kept saying yes because he's family. Sarah pulled out her phone and showed me a text conversation. But after hearing your story, I sent him this. The message was short and direct. Jake, I've decided to stop providing financial assistance. You're a capable adult and it's time for both of us to have a healthier relationship that isn't based on money. I love you, but I won't be your emergency fund anymore. What happened? He was furious at first. Called me selfish, accused me of abandoning family. But you know what? 3 weeks later, he got a second job. He moved to a cheaper apartment. He started making actual budgets. And yesterday, he called to thank me. Sarah smiled. He said being forced to handle his own finances had made him feel more confident and capable than he'd felt in years. He was proud of himself for the first time since college. I felt something shift in my chest. A loosening of tension I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. Your story didn't just help me, Sarah continued. Veronica's been sharing it with other people too. There's a woman in our office whose adult daughter was bleeding her dry financially. Another woman whose ex-husband kept manipulating her into paying his bills. Your example gave them permission to say no. I had no idea. There's something else, Sarah said, hesitating. Veronica asked me to tell you something if I ever met you. She said she's been too ashamed to reach out directly, but she wanted you to know that she understands now why you did what you did. And she's grateful. Grateful? Her marriage is stronger than it's ever been. Marcus is actually proud of the work he's doing now, instead of feeling like a failure who needed constant rescuing. And Camden. Sarah smiled. Camden told her last week that he likes seeing his parents work together to solve problems instead of always calling someone else for help. My eyes filled with tears I hadn't expected. She also said to tell you that Camden asks about you all the time. He doesn't understand all the grown-up stuff that happened, but he knows you still love him. And he wants you to know that he's been saving his allowance money to buy you a present when he sees you again. I had to set my coffee down because my hands were shaking. When he sees me again? Veronica said. She said that when enough time has passed, and when she's proven that she can be a responsible adult who doesn't need financial rescue, she hopes you might want to have a relationship with Camden again. A healthy one, this time. I wiped my eyes with my napkin, trying to process everything Sarah had told me. There's one more thing, Sarah said gently. Veronica wanted you to know that she and Marcus have been going to counseling. They're learning about healthy family dynamics and financial boundaries. The counselor told them that what you did, walking away when they refused to respect your boundaries, was actually a form of tough love that probably saved their family. Saved their family? They were heading for divorce before you cut them off. Marcus was resentful about always needing bailouts, Veronica was stressed about never being able to afford their lifestyle, and Camden was caught in the middle of parents who fought about money constantly. Your intervention forced them to confront their problems instead of avoiding them. Sarah stood up to leave. I should get going, but I wanted to thank you. Your courage to walk away from an unhealthy situation gave me the permission to do the same. And from what Veronica says, it gave her family the push they needed to become actually functional for the first time. After Sarah left, I sat in that coffee shop for another hour, watching people walk by and thinking about the ripple effects of standing up for yourself. I'd thought walking away from my family was about protecting myself from further exploitation. I hadn't realized it might also be about giving them the opportunity to grow into better people. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in 6 months. I wrote a letter to Camden. Dear Camden, I began, I've been thinking about you every day, and I want you to know that I love you very much. I also want you to know how proud I am of your parents for learning to solve problems together and take care of your family all by themselves. I told him about my hiking adventures, about the book I was reading, about the garden I'd planted. I told him that when grown-ups have complicated feelings, sometimes they need space to figure things out, but that doesn't mean the love goes away. And I told him that someday, when he was ready, I'd love to hear about his school projects and soccer games and all the things that made him happy. I didn't mail the letter that day. But I kept it, along with the idea that maybe healing didn't always look like going back to the way things were. Sometimes healing looked like growing into something better. 3 weeks later, my doorbell rang on a Sunday afternoon. I opened it to find a small package on my doorstep with a note in careful 8-year-old handwriting. For Aunt Melody. I saved my allowance. Love, Camden. Inside was a small succulent plant in a hand-painted pot with "Family" written in wobbly letters around the rim. At the bottom of the box was another note: plants need space to grow strong. Just like people. We love you and we're learning to be better. V. I placed the plant on my kitchen windowsill where it would get morning sunlight, and for the first time in months, I smiled thinking about my family. Not because I was ready to go back to the old way of doing things, but because maybe, just maybe, there was a new way forward that none of us had imagined yet. A way that honored everyone's growth, respected everyone's boundaries, and proved that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone else's dysfunction. The plant was small but sturdy, its roots visible through the clear glass pot Camden had chosen. Just like the new relationships we were slowly, carefully learning to build. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.